This is Austin, and I wanted to just talk through clevis. It's my scripting around doing orchestration on Ethereum, and it's a lot like Truffle. It's not as good as Truffle. I'm using it in a replacement as Truffle, and we'll probably eventually migrate to Truffle, but I wanted to kind of just go over it so anybody else using my stuff can see what's going on. So let's just create a project. Called tester, and we'll get into tester and run. So clevis is just a binary that we can run here, clevis init, and we can do that because I've cloned it down and I've done an npm link, which makes it a binary that I can run on my machine. But on top of that, you also want to do an npm install of clevis into your project because it has a package that mimics the binary. So we're going to use the binary to run commands and kind of really poke at the contracts, but then we're also going to want to use clevis in our tests exactly like we did from the command line, and I'll explain that as we get into this. So first thing, let's just go look at the project and see what it looks like when it comes up. So we have in our tester directory this clevis config file, and I'm going to switch it over to Ganache instead of using test_rpc or the LiveNet. And there's some other global variables in here like gas price we're willing to pay and stuff like that. Okay, so then let's get in here, and now that we're talking to Ganache, let's just look at the help from clevis. So there's a bunch of different commands you can run to push contracts out, create contracts, interface with contracts, all that stuff. Let's just make sure everything's working by running a couple of these. So I know that I'm attached to some kind of network if I do clevis. Oops, I did that wrong. That should fail. Yeah. Clevis accounts, it's going to tell us just a list of accounts. Okay, so we're set up. We're looking good. Okay, so let's create a contract called, it's just going to be a name. So we'll just call it name. Okay, so that's going to give us a new folder over here with name.sol, and it's just kind of a boilerplate contract ready to go. There's going to also be dependencies that we'll wire in and arguments that we'll pass to the constructor. So let's just write up a quick name contract, right? So we want it to have a public string for the name, and we want to be able to pass that into the constructor, and we want to be able to set name to name on the creation, and then we also need a function to set the name. Same thing, it takes in a name, and it's public, and we'll have it return just a bool after it does the set. So this is where we're going to bring in Zeppelin stuff. So let's just go ahead and look at their ownable contract. There's no reason to write our own, so we'll make it only owner, which means this needs to be ownable. And that means we also need to bring that in like this with an import. And that also means we need to clone it down in our directory also. Kind of some housekeeping here. Okay, so now let's use clevis to compile our contract. Let's see how we did. Oh, right, dependencies. So I've already kind of got an example here where it just does, uses fs to bring in the ownable stuff and includes it along. So now that we've got our dependency loaded in, it should compile. Come on. Okay, it does. So one last thing is we need to go to our arguments and we need to give it some initial name, Jimmy Legs. Okay, so now that's going to get passed into the constructor when it gets created. And you'll also notice here that a bunch of scripts are created on the compile. Those allow you to, from the command line, hit it, kind of add values, set values, get values, just interface with the contract. And you're doing that from the command line at first, but eventually you're going to be doing all of this from Mocha tests, but it just gives you a way to kind of live interface with it, get a feel for it, understand how your tests are going to work, and then eventually you get to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy this contract out to Ganache, and we're probably going to see, it's going to fail there. So if we look at the help there, we can see that deploy is going to take 2 arguments. It's going to take a name, and it's going to take the account index. So we need to use one of these accounts. So let's just go back and jump. Nope, don't need help again. All right, let's deploy it as the Coinbase. So now we're deploying the name contract as account 0. It comes back with a contract address. It should be out there. So let's just kind of poke at this thing a little bit and understand what it's doing. Okay, so here we can kind of see some of the things that it's got exposed. We've got the owner, we've got the name, we've got set name, and we've got transfer ownership. So even these functions coming from the ownable contract are obviously exposed to us to work with this also. So if we look at the ownable, we can see there's this transfer ownership and this owner that gets out. So all of that stuff is exposed now in scripts here, and we can see how to interface with it. So let's just jump into that and just do clevis contract. Let's just get the name of name to start with. And that should be our Jimmy Legs, okay? And we can also get the owner of name, and that should be this address, right? Okay, cool. So now our contract compiles, deploys, we can kind of poke at it, we can get stuff from it. Let's actually send stuff to it. Contract, let's do a set name on the name contract from the Coinbase account to Happy Hootie. Okay, and now, so that's going to actually do a write to the chain. We get a transaction ID. So now if we go back and we get the name, we should have Happy Hootie. Okay, so we're writing to it. Okay, let's try one other thing. Let's test that another user that's not the owner should not be able to do this. Good. Okay, so we get an error that it reverted. Perfect. So basically our contract's ready to go. This isn't about writing contracts. It should be about the orchestration and the testing, right? So let's get down to the testing stuff. So with the clevis init, it gave us an example script, and this is just kind of some stuff that I put in here, and this is obviously going to change a lot as I kind of build out this tooling. But let's duplicate this example, and let's create one called name. Okay, so this we want to test all of our name stuff. So let's just go ahead and have it. It's going to test that we have at least a couple accounts. Wait, let's see, at least 2 accounts to work with. Okay, and we're going to have it test that it compiles our contract and it deploys our contract. Okay, so now if we just do clevis test name, it's just going to pass that through to Mocha, let Mocha run it, and it's going to watch how Mocha does it and make sure that if Mocha returns any kind of a failure, it catches that. So, and there we got our 0 back from our tests. We've got 3 passing, so we're good to go. And the reason why I'm putting clevis in charge of talking to Mocha is this allows me to chain stuff. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but basically you could kind of have some inception where clevis is running clevis tests. So you could have a Mocha test suite for a specific contract, but then like a full test suite for your whole thing that runs each one in series, or even runs certain ones in different orders and stuff like that. So okay, so now we're testing that it compiles and deploys, but that's simple stuff. Really, the meat of this is testing that our contract logic is working, right? So then as we make changes and everything, we can be sure that everything looks good. So let's write a couple more tests here that do a little bit more advanced stuff. So yeah, so can set name. So these are my examples I have already ready to go. So let's look at these. So can set name of the contract. So right here is kind of the heart right here. See this is saying so this is awaiting clevis to do its stuff just like it would with the command line stuff. So clevis contract, set name, contract, account name. Okay, so this is actually going to test that. Let's pull that in here. That a certain account can set the name on a contract. So let's just say account 0 should be able to set the name to something. And what it's going to do is it's going to, let's go look at that. It's going to set the name, and then it's going to get the name, and it's going to do an assert that the name that it got is the name that it set. So let's just do 2 tests right in a row so we know that it's not already something. So we can do something and then something else, right? So now let's go ahead and run that full, and instead of running, we don't need to compile and deploy and test the accounts, right? So let's just pull that out and focus in just to speed up the dev loop that we're testing just the stuff that we need here. Let's see how it works. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so it set it to something, it set it to something else. Mocha likes it. Okay, now let's testing that it does what it's supposed to do is one thing, but testing that it also keeps us from doing something wrong is also important. So let's jump over here and say, oh, no, that's not what we're going to do. We've got another script called UPS guy. Another script called cannot set that's going to do the same thing, but make sure that someone else cannot set it. And let's just go look at that real quick. I wrote it earlier just so you don't have to go through looking at this, but basically in 10 seconds, we're going to await for clevis to do a contract set name. And I've got this try catch here because it should not get to that line right there. It should fail setting the name as the foreign account, and it should get to this error string. And then actually we're going to assert that the error is a revert. So we know exactly what it did. And if it does get to here, it's going to give us a nice little warning and stuff like that. So what we want to do is account cannot set name. And that's going to be the name contract, but it'll be, say, account 1, since we check that we have 2 accounts, okay? And let's set it to something nefarious. I don't even know if I spelled that right. Okay, here we go. So now let's just run those 3. The first 2 should pass. The third one should also pass, right? I think it does. But then we can kind of poke at the contract and, okay, so it does pass. We get revert as the error. It works fine, but I'm still not convinced. Let's make sure. So let's run a full suite, right? And let's go here and let's pull out the only owner. So now we should get a failure on that last test. It should set it fine, but then the third-party account should also be able to set it, and it should alert us of that right away. And boom, there we go. So we've got one test failing because of the setting the revert error, I hope. Looks like there's something else. Cannot read index. Okay, so let's put that back in, hit save, hit go, make sure our tests run all the way through fine. Yeah, so there was the warning there, was not able to set, or was able to set, right? So it did throw the error. Okay, so then the last thing I want to do is look at creating a full-on test suite. So I'm going to duplicate the name into something like full, okay? And then in full, we're just going to kind of clear out all this stuff and bring in some similar, there we go, yeah. Okay, so full test suite is going to run a clevis test of name. Okay, so if we had more contracts, we would just go through, we would duplicate this out. You know, we'd have name and then we'd have setter or whatever our other contracts were called. Okay, so now let's run, and we're giving it a full like 5 minutes on the timeout here. Let's run a full on test full, right? Okay, so this is going to run a full suite of both the contracts, tests, and everything else. So it's going to look very similar. We're going to see it go through. But what it's looking for is that the clevis test, the thing that we were just running from the command line, is now running in the code, and it's going to give us a number back, and we want to make sure that that number is a 0. So this allows us to kind of like testception, right? Where we're like we're poking at the contract. We're getting it to look right. We're writing tests that test those pokes that we made, and then we're writing a test that runs all the tests and make sure those tests are good. Yo, dog. And it looks good. It came back with a 0, so it says that there was one passing test, which is actually the fact that all 6 of those passed. Okay, so This is clevis. I use it for a lot of different things. It speeds up my blockchain development big time, and eventually I'll get to truffle. And I know I probably should be using truffle, but this works. It's getting where it needs to go, and it'll evolve quickly. Thanks. See ya.